U.S. President Donald Trump says the war with Iran will end very soon, but with warnings that the U.S. would hit it 20 times harder if oil shipments through the Strait of Hormuz are halted. Iran says that Tehran decides the end of the war, not the U.S. Global markets continue to show sharp swings amid the Middle East tensions, with South Korea's benchmark KOSPI surging more than 5% on Tuesday, while global oil prices also came under control. The South Korean government is making price stabilization its top priority, with plans to introduce a temporary ceiling on petroleum prices later this week. We begin in the Middle East, where the U.S. and Israel continue their operations against Iran. President Donald Trump says the conflict could end soon, but Tehran rejects the idea of renewed talks with Washington, as signs of differences also emerge between the U.S. and Israel. Our Park Kwon-woo starts us off.
Around 10 days after the U.S. and Israel launch operations against Iran, signs of a slight rift are emerging between the two countries. U.S. President Donald Trump said Monday the campaign may be coming to an end soon, contrasting with earlier remarks made with Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu that it could last for weeks, if not months.
I think soon.
Okay, and with respect
very soon. Look, everything they have is gone, including their leadership.
The shift comes as concerns grow in Washington over rising oil prices, especially after Israeli strikes on the Iranian military's fuel depots over the weekend. Even Senator Lindsey Graham, a hawkish Republican ally of Trump, urged Israel on social media to be cautious about its targets. Trump's message about ending the conflict soon was immediately met with a backlash from Iran. An official from the Islamic Revolutionary Guards Corps said it was Iran and not the U.S. that would decide when the conflict ends, warning that Tehran wouldn't allow even a single liter of oil to be exported from the region if attacks continue. Iran also signaled that further negotiations with the U.S. are no longer on the table.
Team in the negotiation, said itself that we made a big progress. Still, they decided to attack us. So I don't think, talking with Americans anymore would be, on our agenda anymore.
Trump also warned on social media that the U.S. would hit Iran 20 times harder if it halted oil flows through the Strait of Hormuz, though he said he hopes that will not happen. With the conflict still ongoing, some countries are showing a willingness to mediate, including Russia, Iran's ally, as was disclosed by Trump, who said this was discussed in a phone call with his Russian counterpart. An Iranian deputy foreign minister also confirmed that several countries, including Russia, China, and France, have called for a ceasefire. With many countries signaling interest in mediation, attention is on whether diplomatic efforts could move the conflict toward negotiations. Park Kwon-woo, Arirang News.
Meanwhile, a pledge of action from finance ministers of the Group of Seven helped to push down soaring global oil prices and lift the U.S. stock market. Lee Seung-jae reports.
Global oil markets and U.S. stocks swung sharply on Monday as investors reacted to developments in the Iran war. Oil prices initially surged on rising tensions in the Middle East. Brent crude briefly climbed to nearly $120 per barrel after reports that Turkey intercepted a ballistic missile launched from Iran using a NATO air defense system in the eastern Mediterranean. It was the second time Turkey shot down an Iranian missile this month, raising concerns about possible escalation involving a NATO member. However, prices later reversed after the Group of Seven countries signaled a coordinated release of strategic oil reserves if supply disruptions worsen.
And we stand ready to take necessary measures such as stockpile release. G7 energy ministers will take this discussion forward already tomorrow.
You saw the French declaration that we are now also keeping open the option of drawing on national oil reserves. Now is not the right time, but we, including Germany, are open to doing so in a coordinated process at the appropriate time.
Following the announcement, Brent crude fell about 8% to around $84 per barrel, while U.S. benchmark West Texas Intermediate dropped by roughly 9% to about $81. The New York Stock Exchange saw similar volatility. Major indexes opened more than 1% lower, but rebounded after news of the possible G7 reserve release and comments from Trump suggesting the war was as good as over. During a phone interview with CBS News, Trump said the conflict was very complete, pretty much, claiming Iran's military capabilities have been largely destroyed, including its navy, communication systems, and air force. He added that Iran's remaining missiles are scattered and that its drones and drone manufacturing facilities are being destroyed across the country. Lee Seung-jae, Arirang News.
South Korean stock markets are on a roller coaster amid the escalating Middle East conflict. Hopes for an early end to the war, signaled by U.S. President Donald Trump, encouraged investors to return to South Korea's benchmark KOSPI on Tuesday. Our correspondent Kim Do-yeon has the details.
South Korea's benchmark KOSPI closed at 5,532.59 on Tuesday, up 5.35% from the day before, showing heavy swings that even triggered a buy-side sidecar in early trading. This is significant as it followed a steep decline that triggered a circuit breaker just the day before. The gains came amid remarks from U.S. President Donald Trump hinting that the conflict between the United States and Iran was very complete. Since Operation Epic Fury began early this month, the benchmark KOSPI has shown extreme fluctuations, triggering both sell-side and buy-side sidecars nearly every trading day. After closing at 5,791.91 on March 3rd, the index plunged 12.06% the next day to 5,093.54. It then rebounded 9.63% on March 5th to 5,583.90. Of the 9 sidecars, 5 were sell-side halts triggered during steep market declines, while 4 were buy-side ones activated during rapid rebounds. The volatility continued with a 5.96% drop on Monday to 5,251.87 before surging on Tuesday. Experts say the severe stock volatility is closely tied to the $1 exchange rate as well, with the greenback also fluctuating sharply amid the geopolitical crisis.
The South Korean stock market is an inefficient market dominated by foreign investors who account for about 35% and act as major players. When they buy, stock prices rise, and when they pull out to realize profits, prices fall.
Meanwhile, the Korean won is also fluctuating as it recovered on Tuesday after the exchange rate touched 1,500 won against the dollar at one point during the recent turmoil. With the same reasoning behind the KOSPI's moves, the won closed at 1,469.31 per dollar, down 26.21 from the day before. Kim Do-yeon, Arirang News.
And President Yo-jong has called for stronger preparedness as the tensions in the Middle East continue. During Tuesday's cabinet meeting, he also raised the possibility of a supplementary budget to help ease the burden on the domestic economy. Our Blue House correspondent Song Yoo-jung reports.
As tensions in the Middle East enter their second week following the U.S. military strikes on Iran, President Lee Jae-myung told his cabinet that their role is more critical than ever.
과거 어느 때보다도 더 절박하게 또 충실하게 최선을 다하면 지금의 상황을 더 나은 상황으로 만들 수 있다.
Presiding over a cabinet meeting on Tuesday, Lee said stabilizing prices is the government's most urgent task as uncertainty grows in energy supplies, logistics, and financial markets. The government plans to introduce a temporary price ceiling on petroleum products within the week. President Lee instructed the finance minister to ensure the measure minimizes the burden on customers.
생산 원가가 올랐다. 그거 하면 그 시점에는 다시 또 최고 가격을 변경해야 되는데 기존에 이미 한 열흘 이상 이렇게 이미 올려받은 부분, 그 부분을 고려해서 실제 유가가 오르더라도 그때 바로 최고 가격을 올리지 말고.
He proposed imposing a price cap during last week's extraordinary cabinet meeting. He warned of possible price gouging by oil refiners, citing rising fuel prices despite South Korea holding petroleum reserves equivalent to 7 months of supply. The Fair Trade Commission has launched an investigation into possible collusion among refiners. The president even mentioned preparing a supplementary budget to ease the burden on consumers if the Middle East situation drags on.
We could consider cutting fuel taxes on gasoline by another 10% or increasing direct support. A combination of such measures could help ease polarization while protecting people's livelihoods.
이번 어차피 조기에 추경을 해야 될 상황인 것 같으니까. 지금 재정 지원이나 소상공인 지원이나 뭐 한계 기업들 지원인 뭐 등등 할래도 좀 추가의 재정이.
South Korea currently maintains a 7% tax cut on gasoline, with the maximum reduction capped at 37%. These discussions come as the Blue House has designated this week as an all-out response week to address developments in the Middle East, with a focus on public safety and economic stability. 송유진, Arirang News.
President Yo-jong says an all-in approach has now become an obstacle that hinders growth as it called for corporate co-prosperity. Speaking at a meeting with private firms at the Blue House on Tuesday, he said fostering an environment where large conglomerates cooperate with smaller firms was crucial for sustainable growth. It noted the case of Hanwha Ocean eliminating discrimination between its employees and subcontracted workers for equal performance-based bonuses, and said he hoped to see more of such cases in Korean society. Dozens of companies joined the meeting, including Hanwha Ocean, Samsung Electronics, and SK. In response to the ongoing tariff risks raised by the Trump administration, South Korea's National Assembly has pledged to move swiftly on finalizing the U.S. Investment Special Act that lays out the details for Seoul's U.S.-bound investment. And the National Assembly is poised to finalize the deal this week. And for more on the details, we have our political correspondent An Sung-jin with us today. Welcome back, Sung-jin.
Thanks for having me, Tommy.
So, Sung-jin, this special bill designed to implement strategic investment in the U.S. has been passed with bipartisan support. Tell us more about this bill specifically.
Right, Tommy. So just as you mentioned, just yesterday, the National Assembly advanced legislation aimed at managing and accelerating the large-scale investment in the United States. Now, it's notable that the Assembly's Special Committee handling the bill unanimously passed a special act on strategic investment management between Korea and the U.S., often referred to as a U.S. Investment Special Act.
The investment bill has been passed through bipartisan agreement, with only the final approval remaining. A crisis can become an opportunity. The party and the Lee administration will move forward together to overcome the situation.
It is now time to prioritize people's livelihoods and the stabilization of the economy with these policies.
Now, what this law entails is that it is designed to implement a Korea-U.S. MOU, where Seoul plans to invest $350 billion in America. To oversee the effort, the legislation calls for the creation of the Korea-U.S. Strategic Investment Corporation, which will be fully funded by the government with 2 trillion won, or $1.36 billion in capital. The fund is set to support investments in projects including joint shipbuilding cooperation and other strategic initiatives. To mitigate potential financial and legal risks, the legislation mandates the creation of a risk management committee as well. Investment decisions, including project selection, funding amounts, and timing, will all be handled by a Korea-U.S. Strategic Investment Operations Committee within the corporation, which is to be chaired by the finance minister. Now, before the government begins negotiations with the U.S. on any proposed project, it will have to report to plan in advance to the relevant National Assembly committees for parliamentary oversight.
Now, Sung-jin, the process of reaching this so far hasn't been so smooth, I have to say. Why has the bill become so heated to begin with?
Right, so the proposed bill represents a compromise version that integrates 9 previously different proposed bills, reflecting input from both ruling and opposition parties, as well as the government. Its passage yesterday comes after weeks of political friction. Now, the special committee's work had stalled earlier amid opposition protests over the ruling party's unilateral push on other bills, such as judicial reform. Now, this legislation in particular gained urgency after U.S. President Donald Trump warned in January that tariffs on South Korean goods could revert to 25% if Seoul continued delaying the legislation needed to implement the bilateral investment agreement.
Then, now that the bill has advanced through this special committee, Sang-jin, what process do we expect to see next?
Right, good question, Tommy. So the legislation is expected to clear the National Assembly Legislation and Judiciary Committee and receive final approval at a plenary session on March 12th, which is this Thursday. If lawmakers follow through on the bipartisan agreement and pass the bill at this plenary session, the legislation will be formally enacted. Now, even before the law formally takes effect, the government has begun preliminary reviews of potential projects through an interim task force. Once enacted, the authorities plan to move quickly to finalize the investments and coordinate with their U.S. counterparts to maximize both tangible and intangible support from Washington. Now, the new law is expected to provide a backbone for one of the most largest overseas investment initiatives undertaken by South Korea. Attention is now turning to whether the law could help ease ongoing tariff risks and trade relations between the two countries, as Trump has repeatedly hinted at the possibility of higher tariffs amid delays in creating Seoul's investment framework.
Well, we'll have to see how the final approval at the plenary session unfolds this Thursday. Sang-jin, thanks for the coverage tonight.
My pleasure as always, Tommy.
A contentious labor law has taken effect today amid sharply divergent views between business groups and labor unions. Our political correspondent Moon Hae-ryun explains.
South Korea's controversial so-called Yellow Envelope Law took effect on Tuesday after a 6-month preparation period, bringing major changes to labor relations and collective bargaining. The revised labor law expands the definition of an employer and the scope of labor disputes, while limiting companies' ability to claim damages from workers involved in strikes. One of the most significant changes strengthens responsibility for subcontracted workers. Under the new rules, parent companies may be required to negotiate with subcontractor unions if they are found to exercise substantial control over those workers' conditions such as working hours and methods. Previously, negotiations were generally limited to unions representing workers directly employed by a company. The law also broadens the definition of labor disputes. In addition to decisions directly setting working conditions, disputes can now include management decisions that significantly affect them, such as restructuring or layoffs tied to overseas investment or factory expansion. The government says it spent the past 6 months preparing implementation guidelines and manuals to help companies and unions adjust to the new system. However, the law remains controversial. Business groups warn it could increase labor disputes, arguing that uncertainty over who qualifies as an employer may trigger conflicts at work sites. Labor groups, while welcoming the law, says it still falls short of fully guaranteeing bargaining rights. On the first day of implementation, several labor groups staged rallies and press conferences across Seoul, demanding direct negotiations with parent companies. Unions representing delivery workers, airport subcontractors, and university cleaners called on what they described as the real employers to come to the bargaining table. During a speech marking the 80th anniversary of the Federation of Korean Trade Unions, President Lee Jae-myung said he hopes the law will serve as a starting point for subcontracted workers and parent companies to resolve disputes through dialogue and compromise. The Labour Ministry expects some confusion in the early stages of implementation and says it will provide continued support. Moon Hae-ryun, Arirang News.
North Korea's Kim Yo-jong has slammed the annual ROK-U.S. defense drills currently underway, calling them a rehearsal for war that will hurt regional security. Our defense correspondent Kim Bo-kyung has this report.
Kim Yo-jong, the sister of North Korean leader Kim Jong-un and a department director of the ruling Workers' Party of Korea, warned on Tuesday about the joint military drills between South Korea and the U.S. In a statement carried by the Korean Central News Agency, she said hostile forces' military demonstrations near the regime's sovereign and security areas could lead to unimaginably terrible consequences. Calling the drills a provocative and aggressive war rehearsal, Kim said that regardless of any justification or adjustments, the exercise remains a large-scale, high-intensity war drill. Citing current global geopolitical crises and international conflicts, she added that such actions by enemy states should be met not with proportional responses, but with an overwhelmingly powerful and preemptive offensive. An expert said the remarks appear to be sending a message to the U.S. after its strikes on Iran.
It warns about the U.S.-South Korea joint military exercises, but indirectly it is also sending a message that, unlike Iran, North Korea would immediately retaliate with nuclear weapons if attacked.
Referring to what North Korean leader Kim Jong-un previously said, his sister again stressed the regime's law and iron principle that the strongest offensive capability is the most reliable deterrent. The expert added that while there could be provocations during the drills, they are unlikely to be serious.
It indirectly suggests that North Korea may stage a show of force if U.S. strategic assets are deployed to the Korean peninsula during the joint exercises. The provocation would most likely be launching a ballistic missile, with stronger provocation like an ICBM considered less likely.
South Korea and the U.S. began the annual springtime joint drills, Freedom Shield, starting Monday. The number of troops participating in the exercise is similar to last year, though the number of field training exercises has more than halved to 22 from 51 last year. Kim Bo-kyung, Arirang News.
Train services between North Korea and China will resume on Thursday this week after being suspended for some 6 years. Now, that's according to Kyodo News on Tuesday, based on remarks made by a Chinese official. According to the Japanese outlet, the passenger train service had been halted upon the outbreak of the COVID-19 pandemic. And even after the virus subsided, North Korea continued to refuse Chinese visitors, and only tourists from Russia were able to visit. However, at the North's Workers' Party Congress last month, the regime pointed to the tourism sector to boost economic growth. The outlet noted that China is North Korea's largest trading partner, and economic cooperation is likely to gain momentum. K-pop sensation BTS will expand its upcoming comeback concert schedule for March 21st by increasing the total audience capacity to around 22,000 people. According to the group's agency Big Hit Music on Tuesday, additional standing areas will be added near Gwanghwamun Square, where fans can watch the performance on large LED screens. Now, tickets can be booked from Thursday at 8 p.m. through the online platform Knoll Ticket. Ahead of the performance, BTS will release its fifth studio album, Arirang, and open a special pop-up store in Seoul featuring merchandise inspired by traditional Korean aesthetics. And the pop-up will run at Shinsegae Department Store's main branch and HYBE headquarters from March 20th until April. As a wellness culture becomes more and more popular, young Koreans are turning to traditional healing practices. Moxibustion and rice enzyme spas are emerging as a new experiential wellness spaces. Our Do Young-eun tells us more.
Opening the door, a slightly smoky herbal scent of mugwort fills the air. The shop specializes in traditional Korean moxibustion therapy, which uses heat and smoke of burning mugwort. Customers lie on treatment beds, relaxing as the heated mugwort is first placed beneath their feet. The therapy continues with fumigation treatment along the back before mechanical moxibustion devices are set on the stomach to deliver steady warmth.
My hands and feet tend to get cold, and I often feel tired. I heard mugwort moxibustion is good for your health, so I looked for a place near my home and decided to try it.
Nearby, a rice enzyme spa, once mainly enjoyed by older generations, now offers another popular wellness experience for younger visitors. Here, people bury themselves in warm fermented rice bran, leaving only their faces exposed. The heat generated from fermentation is believed to help detoxify the body, improve blood circulation, and strengthen the immunity system.
In the past, most visitors were older people. But these days, many younger customers are coming too, after seeing it on social media or YouTube.
Spaces like this are redefining traditional therapy as a modern healing experience to recharge both the body and mind. Experts say the trend reflects how the digitally native generation treat traditional wellness practices as shareable experiences.
Nowadays, when people see something on social media that's said to be good for their health, they want to try it themselves. Experience-based consumption has become a major trend.
The relatively affordable price of these activities has helped them emerge as a cost-effective wellness experience. As younger generations explore new ways to care for their health, traditional health practices are finding new life in Korea today. 조영은, Arirang News.
We'll need to wear a mask that protects against fine dust through tomorrow. Dust that flowed in from overseas yesterday, combined with locally generated pollution, has been lingering due to stagnant air. And ultra-fine dust levels stayed at bad levels across most parts today, could linger into tomorrow. Meanwhile, the Gyeongsangdo region is having very dry conditions. Dry weather advisories have been reissued for parts of the region, including Daegu and Busan. And as for temperatures now, mornings still feel winter-like with sub-zero temperatures. And even tomorrow, Seoul, Daegu, and Gwangju will begin the day at just 0 degrees Celsius. Then by the afternoon, Seoul will get up to 8 degrees. Daegu, Busan, Gwangju will make it to 13 degrees Celsius. Temperatures will go up higher as the week goes on with wide daily temperature swings. With that in mind, here's a look at the international weather conditions.
That's all we have for tonight. I'm Kim Dami. From all of us here at Arirang, thanks for watching and good night.